This evening, I take great pleasure in welcoming Àdhamh Ó Broin, who is the Gaelic Culture Officer for Charts. Now, Charts is Argyll and Bute's, Argyll and Isles Culture, Heritage and Arts Assembly, and his position is funded by Board na Gaelic. So this evening, Àdhamh is going to tell us about Gaelic tradition-bearing. So without further ado, I'll pass you over to Àdhamh now.
Thank you very much. Well, as I said, Face Garmagayule, good evening to everybody, and thanks very much to Kilmartin for having me. Some of you may or may not know, before I came on board at Charts, I had the pleasure of doing the Gaelic language contract for the museum redevelopment. So, although the final text you'll see on the boards isn't mine, a lot of the cultural content, the stories, song, etc., that's involved in the collection now is provided by myself, and you can also hear my daughter singing in the museum, which is a lovely thing. One thing I just wanted to plug in, if that's okay, before we start, from our work at Charts, we're currently doing a mapping of participatory Gaelic language artists in Scotland at the moment. So I'm just going to pop in the link to that. And anyone who thinks that they know folk that might be interested in filling this out and help us get an idea of who's where in Scotland involved in participatory arts through the medium of the Gaelic language or connections to the Gaelic language. It could be speakers, could be people who just employ Gaelic motifs in their work. But we want to hear from as many people as possible. So I'll just pop that link into the chat there. I've been in post now for just over 2 years, and it's been the best job I've ever had, being Gaelic Culture Officer at Charts. Brilliant organisation to work for, fantastic staff team. And to be honest, I keep finding myself saying, whenever people ask me what I do, I say to them, well, I do this job. And when I first saw the advert for it, I thought they'd sneaked a look at my CV when they were writing the job description. So it really just has been a perfect fit. It's been wonderful. So lovely to have the chance here to come on behalf of Charts and speak about Gaelic tradition bearing. I was thinking about it through the week and how to sort of pitch it, and it is so vast that both the experience that I've had in that over the last 15 to 20 years and the topic itself, it's so broad. And I thought I would just have a dance through it. And anything that you feel I've missed, anyone in the audience, you get questions and you feel there's things that I haven't gone into deeply enough, then please just hit me up with those questions at the end. I'd be more than happy to answer them. Sometimes actually I'm at my best when I'm just being asked questions, because then I feel that I'm not just banging my gums and I'm actually giving people the information they really want to hear, So we'll just have a flow through. Somebody unmuted there. There we go. Thanks very much. So we'll just have a kind of a float through as best I can, how I came to be a tradition bearer and what that is to be in the Gaelic context. It's really been an accidental thing for me. Whenever somebody says to me, "What's a shenachi?" What's a tradition bearer? And I sort of say, well, imagine there's a horse and cart going along in front of you, and all the wares keep dropping off the back of it, and you keep picking them up, and you're trying to catch up to the cart to put them back where they belong, but the cart is riding away into the distance, and you can't catch it, and then you realise the cart's actually not getting anybody driving it. That's what tradition bearing's like. You're picking up things that are precious, and you want to try and put them back where they belong, but of course, we're living in such an ever-changing world at the moment that nothing's going to be just as it was, and it never was anyway. There's always been change, and whether it's for the good or for the ill, there are precious things that go missing, and I think a tradition bearer's work is to pick those things up and keep them safe, and crucially, pass them on. So they're not just pickled in a jar, they're not just in a collection, a manuscript or a book they're in here and they're in here. And the idea with tradition bearing is to pass it on. That's the crucial bit about it. So I've just got a few kind of rough slides just to give a wee kind of flavour of what I'm talking about. So I'll share my screen if that's okay, Julia. And we'll see how we go with that.
Yeah, that's fine.
You'll see my neurotically tidy desktop. Because see, when you've got a chaotic artistic mind, you need to sort of have some control somewhere, So let's see how we go with this. Right, there we are. Let's get the first slide up. So yeah, so the first slide there. Let's see if I can minimize that. There we go. The first slide there that says Fáilte Chríoch Hárstal, a hearty, friendly welcome to you. And my post, as Jacqueline said, is funded by Bors na Gaelic, supported by the Gaelic Council. So I'm here tonight, as I say, on behalf of Charts. So as I was saying about the tradition bearing, how did I end up coming to that? And I've just got a wee nice shot of Loch Fyne there, just as a background. Well, like so many people in this world, especially now, I was very much a displaced person. And I had one grandmother who was very, very keen to make sure I knew that I was a MacLeod and I was off of Highland folk and, all the rest of it. And she was very keen for me to know that we were Gaels and that the language had been a part of our heritage. And, she shook her fist at me. She was coming up to 100 years old and said, I'm too old to bring the language back, but you need to bring it back, So I was given a very specific instruction. But I started on the language. People have got different entry points. Some people are very interested in traditional dance, or they're interested in traditional cookery, or they're interested in, sort of ceremony and ritual and the spiritual element of things. And, or they get into it through place names. I mean, there's all sorts of roads into tradition bearing. And of course, Gaelic tradition bearings, I mean, that's only, within one particular cultural context. You get tradition bearers all over the world in all sorts of different contexts. And there's a heck of a lot of tradition bearers out there that don't even know they are tradition bearers. It helps to have a good memory. I'm not going to lie. I'm somehow able to hoover things up and they just stay. And they seem to form into a cohesive order. So I'm talking about the chaos in my head, but that's just when somebody asks me to cook a meal for 6 people, then I sort of do a backflip with fear. But when it comes to reviving dialects and pulling all sorts of esoteric information together and somehow giving it some sort of cohesive order, I'm quite relaxed and calm about that. I can do that quite well. Different brains, different strokes for different folks. So anyway, it's probably going to be useful to tell you sort of who I am and where I come from briefly at the beginning. So in traditional style, I would introduce myself by saying it's Misha Àdhamh Machgamish Gamish Vorich Burachi Gamish Girimich Gamish. Oh, wait a minute, hang on. It's Misha Àdhamh Machgamish Gamish Vorich Girimich Gamish Burachi Gamish. So I got the Jerimit and the Morachi mixed up. And that's the patronymic. So that takes me back 7 generations. And in introducing myself that way, then I would be accepting responsibility to be a good 7th generation as well. So I'm not only the latest in the line, well, my kids are the latest in the line, but I'm also potentially the 7th generation as well. And a lot of different Indigenous peoples across the temperate areas of the world and possibly elsewhere as well count 7 generations in their way of looking at the world, their cosmology, the kind of the sense in which they're part of a chain, they're part of a much longer continuum of people and tradition than just their own lives, their own sort of individual selves. So where I come from, like so many people, I'm very much displaced. My father's people came across from different parts of Ireland to Glasgow after the, call it like it was. it can be easily claimed that there was a genocide in Ireland. Some people call it the famine, whichever way you want to look at it. And they ended up in Glasgow because they were destitute. And my mother's people ended up squeezed out of Caithness and Sutherland through a mixture of clearance and economic necessity and came to Edinburgh. And I've got a wee great granny that comes from London. So my mother's people, if you go back down the mother line, eventually end up in Norfolk and Suffolk, believe it or not. So, like so many people, quite a diverse kind of story. But the vast majority of my people are Gaels, so ethnically, that's how I see myself. So after that, sorry about the tiny silly slide. My Edinburgh folk moved to Glasgow, and then my mother and father met there, and completely randomly, I ended up in Cowal in Argyll. So I'm both a Gael, both an Indigenous person, and a complete blow-in. So I've got a foot in each set of circumstances, So I like to think that I understand both outlooks fairly well, and I think that stands me in quite good stead. So that's my background. What I was wanting to talk about is sort of the place of tradition bearing and language within the landscape. So in days gone by, you had the Indigenous people of a place who, and you can take the brown line, this crude picture that I've made up, you take the brown line as the the earth essentially, and Indigenous people are couched within that environment, and they're couched in the land, and they have a symbiotic relationship with the land. And people coming in from the outside are in that sort of a kind of a almost superficial floating thing of kind of just appearing and not really being bedded in and not related to anybody and not speaking the language and not carrying the culture, But there's two types of incomer, of course. There's people who come in and they just want to get involved and they want to do the right thing and they want to invest in the place and they've got deep love for the place they come to and they just want to contribute and that's amazing, and that's the kind of incomers that any Indigenous people to a place will hope will join them wherever they are. But of course, you've got other folk who obviously just buy up loads of properties and then rent them out as Airbnbs. And yes, well, we know where that story goes. But the ideal, well, I'll talk about that in a second. The current situation has ended up due to colonisation and various other, forces out with our control. That the Indigenous people, and certainly in Argyll, have ended up uprooted and they've been shifted about through clearance and through economic necessity of having to move to the cities and so forth. And a lot of people obviously coming in and doing that, buying a property and only living there 3 weeks of the year. And it's, we all know what kind of havoc that has caused. And so we've ended up with Indigenous people being uprooted as well. And because of corporal punishment over the last, 150 years, kids were punished for speaking Gaelic when they came into school, even though they couldn't speak any English. There was some real depredations occurred, for people coming in to school and just being who they were as natives of a place. So the Indigenous people ended up uprooted as well. And we've ended up with this situation where both the people that come into a place and the Indigenous folk who belong to the place don't quite fully belong, don't quite fully have the capacity to be tradition bearers. And the ideal scenario, as I see it, is that we all end up rooted back into the land and we all end up in a position of being able to contribute to the place that we're in a meaningful way, whether we belong to the place or we don't. And we're all able to help to carry the culture and the cultural legacy and the language of a place. So that's my ideal scenario. Because a lot of the time, folk, I know myself, when you belong to a place, a lot of the time you're not seeing the wood for the trees, and some great ideas can come in, and new pollination can come in from the outside. And if we can keep a balance, then we're in good shape. So this is the ideal scenario for me. So tradition bearing is not about where you come from. It's about how effectively you're able to carry the cultural legacy of a place. And I think an opportunity to tradition bear in an area has to be open to the most dedicated and the most capable people to do that, no matter where they're from. And I'm a case in point, both being a Gael, but also being a blow into Argyll. So it's quite an interesting situation for me to be in because it allows me to really feel how it is to genuinely inhabit, both ends of this discussion. So tradition bearing then, here's the sort of context in the ideal scenario, and that everybody can help to carry the load, to what Hamish Henderson called the carrying stream, and everyone can be a part of that and help to continue that on. How did I come to not be so dislocated, to get plugged back in, to get to the stage where I sort of realised I was a tradition bearer, no matter how almost accidentally it happened? Well, the first thing I did was, as I said earlier, is I came to the language first because that was the thing my granny had switched me on to. And I did the same as anybody else. I came back to Argyll. Here's a wee picture of Àdhamh Ó Broin. I've been on the board there for the last 8 years. It's very dear to my heart. And I came back to Cowell after a long time away, and I had learned up the standard tongue to reasonable fluency. And I came back and I realised that the language in Cowell was just about gone. The most that was left when did I come back? Sort of maybe heading for 15 years ago. The most that remained was really just words and phrases and memories of the language being spoken. There were some fantastic tradition bearers still left, but they didn't realise they were tradition bearers, and they felt that because they didn't have the language, then what the knowledge that they had wasn't really any use. But back to my own journey, what I did first of all was what so many people do. I just got a hold of every single manual I could get for the language and just devoured it whole. Read some of them 2-3 times, cover to cover, and literally just get every single publication that had ever been produced for Scottish Gaelic dialect, and got to fluency in the standard tongue by the time. When did I start? About 25, and I got there and was understanding, everything fine when people were speaking and all that, and able to have full conversations on any topic. Probably the time I hit about 30. But as I say, having come back to Argyll and realising that where I grew up, the language was almost away, I just get filled with this incredible sense of injustice and disappointment and horror, that it got to that stage. And kind of I suppose in a way, the more I learned and the more I found out, I was confused as to why nobody cared, So I did this, picking up the stuff that was falling off the back of the truck. But as I was doing that, I went online and I scoured archives, National Library online and all that sort of thing for anything that referenced Cowell or the dialect or poetry from the area or anything like that. And I started finding bits and pieces of stories and so forth, in Tilburndolachish there, for instance, there's a recording of Sandy Campbell, who belonged to Knapdale. There's a big load of those, but there's not that many recordings from Cowell and Middlegill in Tilburndolachish. But there's a heck of a lot of recordings that are in the School of Scottish Studies that aren't actually published on any websites. So I got a hold of all of them, and I started listening to them when I was going to sleep at night. And for it must have been 2 or 3 years, every single night, I would have the headphones on going to sleep. And it would be recordings of old folk from the area who were recorded in the 50s or 60s or 70s or 80s sometimes, just speaking. And so I took the fluent standard Gaelic that I had learned, and I sort of turned that over gradually to Cowell and Middlegill. So just to sort of clear something up in case you're wondering, the Bute, Cowell and Middlegill Gaelic is just about the same. And in that area, it's the only area in Scotland where even in the language you would call it Gaelic. You wouldn't call it Gaelic. It's Gaelic. So Bute, Cowell and Middlegill all had the same dialect. And I figured this out, as I was going. So I started out, as I say, once I'd done all this, and it was all happening at once, and I was starting to go to see the elders. And what happened then was that miraculously, my friend of mine, David Clement, who's a linguist, he's retired now, He had been over in Sweden, and he happened to come into the town of Uppsala, and he thought to himself, well, I'm pretty sure that Niels Holmer, this is a linguist that was working in the 30s and 40s in the Scottish Highlands, in Argyll specifically. So I'm pretty sure his son would be in Uppsala still. And so he tracked him down and rang him up, and as it happened, he was. And when he got home, they were in contact. And Niels Homer's son, who's a linguist himself, he said, "I've still got all my father's notebooks from Cowell and Mid He was going around for a few months in the late 30s and early 40s, collecting words and songs and stories. He said, "I'm sure I could scan that if anybody's interested." And of course, David tells me this, and I had no expectation that I would find this level of material. And lo and behold, there's 7 little school jotters, as you can see the pages there. Anyone of my vintage or perhaps older will remember the school jotters looking like that, you know. And I'm sure they probably look similar still. And in it was what you see in front of you there. It's International Phonetic Alphabet. And I couldn't read International Phonetic Alphabet, but I learned to read it by the seat of my pants just by going over and over and over and over these texts. And if you speak the language, of course, then you know roughly what the sounds are supposed to be. So that's how I figured it out. So I was granted access to these, and I remember the day that they came through in my email. And I mean, honestly, I was crying, literally in tears. I couldn't believe that the potential to properly tradition bear for the area, which would have been very, very slim, was suddenly now exponentially increased. I mean, it's at that time I still didn't realise I was a tradition bearer. I was just doing what I thought was the right thing, is gathering all this together and digitising it and hoping to eventually make it available to people. So that was a huge boon. So I memorised just about everything in the 7 notebooks. That all went into the old noodle as well. And it's most of it's still there. Most of it's still there. But you need to keep using it. You keep talking about it. You need to keep dishing out the stories. You need to keep singing the songs. Otherwise, it atrophies. Aye. So I started, as I say, going round the elders and asking them about some of the people that were quoted in Holmer's books. And there's Donald Robinson, and poor Donald passed away a couple of years ago now. And I used to go round to Donald's, and he gave me a big load of old photographs from where his uncles and aunties were in Fiarnach Farm at Coolin Drive. And I've still got that suitcase somewhere with all that stuff in it. And Donald, he had phrases and words and all, that sort of a thing. And then this is Angus Unis MacCunish and Dol MacLachlan, Angus McInnes and Donald Burgess were in Gaelic. And these 2 fellas are away now as well. And I went to visit them. And although they didn't have the language, you see, part of tradition bearing isn't just about the language or the songs or the stories or the proverbs or what have you. It's about the way these people carried themselves. And I learned to carry myself differently. And I shook off a lot of the modern world and a lot of the trappings of that. Not all of them right enough, still working on it. But I shook a lot of that off and returned to being able to sit, stand, speak, carry myself, hold myself, treat other people in the same way that my ancestors would have done, with that same hospitality and friendliness, but sort of suspicion of anything just too sophisticated, And that's the way these old fellas were, and they were just delightful. And I missed them a great, yeah, I missed them a great deal. And here's Dougie Campbell. Dougie was years up in the north of Mull and his wife there. And I only managed to visit him once, and it was terrible weather trying to get up there. And I was going to come back and we are going to do a wee recording together, his memories and what have you, but I never made it. And Dougie passed away a couple of years ago, and I regret I never managed up there. And here's Donald Crawford. Donald Crawford's a retired fox hunter, so he was in that old trade. And Donald's still with us in Dunoon, as far as I know. So I interviewed him at quite some length back in 2018 in Glenmasson. And here's Johnny Gillis. And Johnny, his mother's people belonged to Kilfinnan parish, and his father's to Glendaruel. So he was a cowl man through and through, and he didn't have the language either. None of these people had, other than Angus McInnes, who could speak, he could hold a conversation quite happily still. But the rest of them, it was an outlook, it was a way of holding themselves, it was a way of talking, and their English was so shot through with grammar and idiom that belonged to Gaelic. So they were Gaels, they were ethnically absolutely Gaelic to the core, despite not having fluency in the language, and just picking up stories and anecdotes and having them point me in the direction of things and point out where we places of interest where that people had forgotten about and just all these sorts of things. And I just sort of took all this in. And there's Alistair McVeigh. People maybe remember Alistair from Dilhore, just down in Kilmeacle there, just close to Dunad. And Alistair very sadly passed away suddenly about 4 years ago. But I spent a good bit of time with Alistair and made a few recordings with him as well. And Alistair, his Gaelic was perfectly local, even though he couldn't hold a conversation in it. Everything that he had, all his words, phrases, everything, they were all hyper local to that area, to the Monivore, to the Dunads and about the area, because both his parents were from there as well. So Alistair missed the language just by a gnat's wing. And here's myself and my kids, gosh, a good number of years ago, with Robbie McVicker, Rabers Machgavilker. And Robbie grew up at, what is it they call it, Barachul, in Kilmeacle. And his father's from Lochfineside, and his mother's people were from Tiree, but she'd grown up in Gomitra, if I remember rightly, in Mull. So Robbie had a mixed dialect, but he could still speak fluently. So I was years with Robbie, and I remember a friend of mine did a wee survey, a wee, what do you call it, an estimate of the recordings that I had of Robbie, and I think he worked out that it was 50 something hours. So Robbie's very thoroughly recorded before he sadly passed away now 3.5 years ago. So we miss him very much because he really he had unfailing patience for all my stupid questions about goodness knows what. Nothing was a problem. Nothing was too much trouble. So I'm greatly indebted to Robbie. So all this time, the tradition bearing thing is you're taking all of this in and you're making this commitment to carry it physically, bodily, and pass it on to anybody who's willing to listen to you bang your gums about it, And my kids here, this is a crucial bit, since they were born, I made the decision not to speak English to them. So even though my Gaelic was rubbish, when the lassie at the back there was first born, I could barely speak the flaming language. I just kept going. And you're like a child with your children, and you just kind of grow together. And I was never ever spoken any English. So that's how it goes. And we used to lie every single night in life when they were babies, right up until they're 10, 11, 12. And then they get too big to all fit in the bed with me, We would lie on top of the cover and sing the songs that I had brought back to life and tell the stories. And the kids were involved in bringing these songs back to life. So they were tradition bearing. And they're now, gosh, the twins will be 16 at the end of January, and the lassie at the back there, Kiva, she'll be 18 in a couple of weeks' time. So they're doing their sort of wide arc at the moment and figuring out what they enjoy in life and going here and there, and they're busy doing their own thing. But we still only ever speak Gaelic to one another, and they're very, very firm in their belief that they're going to bring up their own kids whenever they have them with the language. So that's the tradition bearing thing. It's to make sure that it's passed on and to make sure that the idea of tradition bearing, the importance of it, is implicit in their perception of who they are and how life works. I can't mind there they are there. So I did a sort of almost like a coming of age ceremony for them at Dunad for the twins when they were 9 and the other lassie a couple of years before. And we just kind of developed a sort of a rigmarole to go through through a mixture of research and intuition and a lot of wild meditation on the far side of the dune to get a bit of the ceremony back into our lives. And that's a big part of the tradition bearing thing for me is ceremony. And I've learned a lot about that from working with other tradition bearers from all around the world. And I've had the pleasure of working with people, Mapuche from Chile and Karaja and Munduruku and Hunikuin from the Amazon, and Quechua speaking people from the Andes and people from the Altiplano in Argentina, Bolivia rather, and lots of folk from Central America, Bribri people and Nahuatl speakers and Toltec folk, and then a lot of folk from North America as well, from Turtle Island as they call it, Wet'suwet'en, Coast Salish, Anishinaabe, Mohawk, um, aye, and then Minyungbal and Gumbaynggirr people from Australia and the Maori from New Zealand, and lots of different indigenous peoples from the kind of minoritized peoples of Europe as well. From the Basque Country and Corsica and Ireland. The Irish, of course, being Gaels, just like the Highlanders of Scotland, really. So these people, working with these people and being in ceremony with these people, has filled in a lot of gaps in what our ceremonial practice would have been. But all the while, and this is the thing to make very clear, is there's no greater teacher than the land and the water. And wherever you don't know what you're doing, if you falter and you fall into doubt, then if you sit long enough in quiet contemplation on the land and you pay attention to the rhythms of nature, then you'll get shown what to do. So it's definitely a spiritual thing. There's a spiritual element to it. Make no mistake. Let's see if I have another slide after this. I can't remember. Aye. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I wanted to plug in, or whether we just move on to questions straight away. It's such a spaghetti junction tradition bearing thing, that it's really difficult to know whether I've covered it adequately, because I'm not an academic. I'm a reasonable scholar, but I'm not an academic. So I don't have a big list of things here. I'm not working off a list, or I never have a set list when I do a gig. I don't do things like that. I work off my intuition, because I'm carrying tradition rather than carrying convention, if that distinction makes any sense. So I probably have left a load of things out, but I'd be thrilled if folk just fancied asking some questions and we could take it from there. So how to work with us at Charts, if you've got anything Gaelic language or culture related within Argyll and you fancy, chatting to me about that, or you need some advice on anything at all, I'd be absolutely thrilled to hear from people. I don't hear from people just nearly enough. It would be lovely if folk got in touch more. So if there's anything I can help you with, I'd be only too thrilled. And the final thing that I definitely want to plug in that's just popped into mind is that tradition bearing doesn't have to be something like this, where it's an incredibly obvious, defined kind of calling in life. Tradition bearing is just paying attention to what your granny's telling you about how she does things. It's paying attention to how your mammy makes the soup and no thinking you know it all. It's looking at how, your father or your grandfather hold themselves, and you chuck out the rubbish, because listen, we've all had our ups and downs with our parents and our, relations and our families and everything. It's not all plain sailing, that's for sure. You chuck out the rubbish, but the good things you keep. And in a sense, that is a form of tradition bearing. It doesn't have to be stories or songs or what have you. It can be just the way people hold themselves, because they come from a tradition. And therefore, being a bearer of that sometimes is just, a bodily thing, and not necessarily a literary or a musical thing. So I'm more or less done, but I thought what I could certainly do, maybe if I've got time before we move on to the questions, is I could just chat about a couple of particular things, a couple of items that I've restored that belong to Cowal Gael, and that'll give you an idea of how the kind of mechanics of the tradition bearing work. Would that be a good thing to do? Shall I do that?
That'd be great, Àdhamh.
Aye. Right, so wait a minute till I get rid of this slideshow. Will I stop sharing? Is that it?
There you go.
Aye. So what I could do is I could talk about a couple of the songs. My youngest daughter is the one who's been working mostly with me on the songs. And as I say, you can hear her singing in Kilmartin Museum if you stick the headphones on. She's singing a song by the Tyree bard, Neil Macadettin, about Kilmartin. she's not here, unfortunately, because she's got a drama on a Thursday night, so she goes off to do that. So that's unfortunate. But and my boy's busy with homework, but I've got another lassie with me who, if you wanted to ask her any questions, she'll be turning 18 in a couple of weeks, and she's just gone to Glasgow to do Gaelic at Glasgow. So she's taking it on to uni, which is lovely. I feel almost in a way I'm kind of, because I know all the staff, of course, they're all my pals. So I'm kind of handing her over and going, well, I've got her this far, right? It's your turn to take it on now, you know? So if anybody was very keen to ask next generation a question, then by all means. Very quickly then, just because I see we're just about 20 to 8, I'll chat over a couple of the items that I sort of rescued, and I think good examples of this would actually be two songs. So the first song, Marasgir in Oige, and I'll sing it quickly. It's only just short, and then I can tell you how I've come to carry this song and how it's now a bit of a family party piece. So the song is about sheep stealing and about this young fella that gets caught sheep stealing and ends up in Inverera jail. And of course, once he gets into Inverera jail, he realizes the error of his ways, no doubt when he sobers up, And so he composes this song as a lament to his own foolishness for getting involved in stealing sheep. And anybody that knows me that's in the audience this evening will have heard this song before. Julia, you'll have heard this song before, undoubtedly, Rachel, you'll have heard it as well, I imagine. So this is Marasgir in Oige. An y machri braidd flwyddyn, dic mynd sianach ffyn yn gyrach, a dw gael ddysach se yw schempiach in ar yra. Hori mahw corno, hi o man i erich, hori mahw corno. Marasgir yn Oige, sygar i chwr i chine, Snar hwc na ffyr y gol ni, sy hwc mi siors y gilgai, hori mahw corno. Hier om een jerich, hori mahu korno. Het ors moeie bochpui, helom nach genu to me rikshin, Gewak se bani advai, je garach de goed sprei, hori mahu korno. Hier om een jerich, hori mahu korno. Nam feien nes na glassen show. Ich me gach is wie een reeuch, schan je wat een saser is me, get de jiche wat de gele, hori mahu korno, hier om een jerich, hori mahu korno, hori mahu korno, hier om een jerich, hori mahu korno. So that's that song. And I don't do it in flighty, fluttery mod style. It's old school. Like these songs are they've got tunes in order that the story can be told. They're no for standing with your hands clasped behind your back, singing like a songbird. You're not there to perform and impress people. You're there to dish your culture out, to tell something about who you are and where you come from, and to communicate something about the intrinsic beauty of your culture. So that's the tradition-bearing thing. So that song, there was snippets of it in an old recording, and gosh, where else did I find some of it? Well, it was in Holmer's notes, but the old recording of Gillespie Baxter, Archie Baxter, called Drive, the old recording only had the verses, so we didn't know how the chorus went. So we sort of mocked up a chorus just to fill in the blanks. But then we realised we probably didn't have all the song. And then in Holmer's notes that he collected in Cullen Drive in the early 40s. In fact, Johnny Gillis that you saw in the photograph there, when Holmer came round, Johnny Gillis said that everybody thought he was a German spy. Because this was 1941 or 42 or something, But so he collected the song. But the problem is that it was in Holmer's own notation. and I don't know what it is because I'm musically illiterate. I can't read a note of music, but it's not staff notation. It's some kind of so fast something or other, but it's not that. It's a funny Swedish version that Holmer had. So it was only his son that was able to interpret it. So his son then interpreted it and whistled it back to me in a recording, sent the recording of him whistling it back to me. That gave us the chorus. And then Francis Dunlop, who heads up the Skipaloi Inachlui, the walking group that they walk the Tweed at Àdhamh on one Saturday a month. So Francis has been of huge assistance, and Francis put it into staff notation. So that allowed somebody else to play the melody properly on the piano or whatever it was. And then eventually, so then I had all these bits and I had it all sitting. And then myself and the kids just sort of sung it over and over and over and over and over and over and over again every single night in life for, I don't know, probably 7 or 8 months until it was really sitting well. And it went through all sorts of small minor changes, and we realised the verses weren't in the right order, but eventually the song came out. So the song gets sung anywhere, and anybody will listen to me singing it now. And the hope is that people in Cowling Gael would pick this song up again. And I know that Dan the Mayorman, his Mrs. Alison, they've just had a wee baby, Aoife. Oh, maybe enough Gordy, maybe enough Gordy. And Alison's been picking up the song, she's been singing it. So at least somebody's taking it on. So that's one example. The other example is there's a recording over in Dwarfish, and there's a fella called John Campbell, who belonged to Kilmartin, talking about this song, the whole and that means turning my back on this township. And this Johnny Campbell gives the words this song, but he doesn't give the melody. So unless you get a melody, then you can't carry the song. So I said to my youngest daughter, that's the lassie that you'll hear singing in the Kilmartin exhibition, I said to her, would you help me compose a tune for this? So I got the chorus, and I was pretty happy with the chorus, but she helped me refine it a wee bit. And then she helped me compose the verse melody, right? So this story, my turning my back on the township, was about the Argyll clearances. Contrary to popular belief, there were clearances in Argyll, and there was a particularly savage one at Argyll. And this song, therefore, is a crucial bit of history that was suppressed, and the suffering of these people was suppressed, and it was all just whitewashed out of history. But it happened. So I'll sing this song, and that'll bring this history to life, and that's what tradition bearing's all about. It's all about, so much of it is about the beauty of the carrying the culture, but it's also about attempting to speak to injustice, because a lot of Gaelic songs from the 19th century were about that because of the clearances. So the song goes, Mochulu, 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 Richard Balishaw, Smee Rishanache, Fantaris, Mohenner me, Mochulu, 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 Richard Balishaw, Smee Rishanache, Fantaris, Mohenner me. Poltalach is machbarstin, rein na geel a chanachuf, nan jen of spianagorna, o vikachar poltalach, mocholo, 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 rische badesha, smedische nache, van daar is mohener me, mocholo, 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 rische badesha, smedische nache, van daar is mohener me. Naar heen in Marston Keularm, a loot of wine and garrison. She shoot around the waistline, Magalas, you have been rain. Mocholo, 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 Richard Balishaw. Es meirische nache, van daar is mohener me. Mocholo, 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 Richard Balishaw. Es meirische nache, van daar is mohener me. So the words are made whenever the Argyll clearance was 1854, something like that. And the melodies is my own, and my daughter contributed to that. So that's a form of tradition bearing as well, where you've only got half the tradition, the words. You don't have the tune, so you have to come up with a sympathetic tune in order to carry the tradition effectively. Otherwise, the words are just written down somewhere, and who's going to see that? You know, you could post them online, or you could write a book with them in it, but unless there's a tune to carry it, tradition bearing has to happen person to person. That doesn't mean it's not great to write books. I'm currently writing a book about lost cowl Gaelic songs at the moment. That's a brilliant thing, but it's not the whole of tradition bearing. The tradition bearing is three-dimensional, and it really should be person to person, and it's picking up the important things that are getting lost, and it's helping to pass them on. And it doesn't matter where you come from; you can get involved and you can help. So, so that's my take on what it's all about, and I would love to hear any questions. So, if we've got 10 minutes at the end, is that all right?
That's fine, I guess. Absolutely.
Great.
Okay. Okay, so I will just get you back there. There you are, and then you can see Jacqueline again.
Smashing.
I can't see any questions at the moment. Does anyone in the audience have any questions at all that they would like to ask Àdhamh while he's here?
Like, what does it all mean?
Um,
Somebody must have a question. Surely to goodness.
I have a question, but I don't know how to do the raised hand question thing that you press.
Just go for it then.
Okay.
Yep.
I just wanted to ask if you're able to give any examples of ceremonies or rituals that were part of the Gaelic culture in the land around here that people did, you know, in a yearly or weekly or anything like that you've come across.
Well, there's lots and lots of snippets, you know, and again, it's just like with ceremony, you've quite often, you know, you've got the tune without the words without the tune. So there's wee bits and pieces, common to a lot of places in Europe. You know, we do what's called a course, you know, and you're walking 3 times around any sacred place. So it could be a standing stone, but it could also be a churchyard. You know, whenever you're coming anywhere to do any ceremony, you're doing that first, almost to lock the place down. You know, you're going sunwise round the thing. Like any other people, we made and make. I need to say make because we do it. You know, make offerings to the ancestors, and this is in common with every single other Indigenous person I've ever met. They all do exactly the same thing, and they're thrilled to find that there's people here that are doing that. So if you're going to take anything, then you have to make an offering. You know, you've got to balance what you take with what you give. And so you'll hear about people talking about making offerings of milk to the wee people, and the wee people can quite happy, although they've ended up sort of anthropomorphized and personified, and essentially they are ancestor spirits from the womb mounds of the earth. You know, whatever way you want to look at it. So if you're offering milk back to the wee people, then folks will say, well, I don't think the wee people drink the milk. I think the milk just gets consumed by, you know, whatever beasties are in the ground. And you're like, aye, it does. But the act of it, and the time it takes to do it, and the mindfulness of being in a place and offering something that you would rather consume yourself, the act of minor sacrifice, and they're just taking the time to say, I'm not just here to take what I want because I'm a human and I think I'm at the top of the food chain. I'm here to be mindful and take my time with what I'm up to. I think it's just a very good way to be in the world. So I think the idea of they're literally being wee people, it doesn't make that much sense to a lot of folk, and that's actually okay. I'm not remotely offended by that, because ultimately science and mythology work perfectly together. And there's got to be, it's either or. You've got to have one or the other. You're not allowed to have spirituality and science. It's complete garbage. They are literally absolutely symmetrical halves of the same whole. So whether you say, I'm going to offer this milk because that'll be good for the beasties in this mound, and therefore the ecosystem here will be the healthier for it, and that'll be great for the environment. Or whether you say, I'm going to symbolically offer this milk to the ancestor spirits and take my time doing it, and be really mindful and maybe sing to them while I'm at it, and that way offer respect and reverence for the landscape. Well, either way, it's a win-win. You know what I mean? So just wee things like that are still palpable in our mythology and our practice. But you're talking seasonally. Oh, there's all kinds of different things that you could be doing. I was up in Caithness, where my mother's people came from, in the Highland portion of Caithness, with a fella who's got all the Gaelic place names. He's 92 now, because he learned them from a gamekeeper in the 1930s. So this information shouldn't exist, because none of the place names are on maps, but he's still got them all. And we did massive amounts of recording with this fella to make sure and get it all down. And fascinatingly, this fella's quite a bit divorced from actual practice. And yet he says to me, I remember there were two wifeys that stayed down the house tree there, and they was putting the cattle across a wee island in the middle of a stream, and on that island there would be embers, and they would put the coos through that embers, and that would be the thing they would do, and they would do that at belting. And I'm thinking, how does a guy in 2024 remember people still practicing this in the middle of the 20th century? But there you go. You see, now some people would say, well, it's really important to have the cow cross through water, then go through fire, and then go through water, because water and fire is the greatest alchemy. Now you can blend these things, given that they're supposed to be mutually, one puts out the other, or one melts the other, or whatever. You can do that as the greatest. But other people would say, aye, but when they went through the embers, the smoke would be killing off the ticks and what have you. Well, it doesn't matter. Both are correct, right? You know what I mean? So there's wee things like that. And you'd say to them, what about standing stones? Now, did you have standing stones down here? And they say, oh, well, I didn't pay that much mind to standing stones, but I can tell you this, you would never mess about with one. You'd just leave it there. So these wee things were still in his mind, had been important, even if he didn't necessarily know why. So the tradition bearing had gone, but the instincts remained, Sorry, I'm banging on. Is anybody else get? Thanks, Rachel. Anybody got other questions?
There's Margaret's got a question too, if you want to ask it, Margaret.
Yes, thank you for a great talk, really interesting. My question is, do you think you have to be born in an area or have very strong ancestry in an area to be able to make an effective connection with the land in that area?
No, I don't. It helps. I'll no lie. But see what I was saying earlier about the fact that I'm both Indigenous and a blow-in. And I've connected incredibly deeply with the land in Cowal and Mithergyle, and especially, in fact, in Mithergyle. And now, my wife's people actually are some of them. They're McNabbs and McKellars and Clarks from Mithergyle. So my wife's folk, in fact, but I didn't know that when I married her. But I'm not from Mithergyle at all, and yet the land has totally accepted me. But you know what's really interesting? For all that we want to sort of, in life, we often try and force certain things into being because we think it's right for us. It's what will suit us best, or it's, and we push and push and push. And I remember doing that in Cowland Gael to an extent with the old folk. There was a part of me, when I was a young man and I was in my late 20s, early 30s, and all the fire to get this job done. And I remember being a wee bit offended about the fact that Cowland Gael folk did not accept me as one of their own. They absolutely did not. But they accepted me as a Gael. They knew that I was broadly part of the family, but I was not really anything to do with them, and they were very definite about that, and they still are. So there's an interesting thing. I think the land, because of the mycelial network, so that's the scientific way to look at it. The land's all connected the world over. It doesn't really matter where you come from, you can plug in. It's the ethnicity thing's interesting. That there's a sense in people, just like the old fella saying about the standing stone, you wouldn't mess with it. There's a sense in people. They just know their own people. So the land, 100%, I've always felt so plugged in Cowland Gael. But I was very, very just politely and firmly rebuffed by the people. And I still am. And they're incredibly warm and hospitable and friendly to me. But I know fine well I don't come from there.
No, thank you, Margaret. And I've got Fiona's got a question for you as well. Fiona, like to ask it?
Good day, Luheen.
Come on.
Thanks for your sunshine, Bashin Gamayin. Thanks, Àdhamh. That was very interesting talk tonight, and just really nice to hear a wee bit more about the background of your work and things.
We're seeing each other twice in a week, Fiona.
We have. I know it's a busy week for us. I was just wondering, maybe, and I thought as well, maybe some other folk on the call wouldn't know really so much about. What do you think your future plans would be with tracks to bring some of these traditions back into the communities that you're working with at the moment?
That's a brilliant question. That is the $64,000 question, isn't it? Because I've talked about everything up to this point. Well, so I had a website called dalriada.scot, and I had the majority of the lore that I've gathered from Cowell uploaded to there. Didn't have much from Gael yet, but it was to display all the lore that I'd gathered and just put everything on the website, just to allow, especially the people of the area, but anyone from all over the world, just to access it, because as I say, I respect the firm ethnic boundaries people have, because when you're a part of a minoritized people, you have to be quite firm about it. You've got to be quite assertive, otherwise you'll disappear as a people, you'll be erased. But on the other hand, like I said, I think the lore is for everybody. And there are so many common themes in storytelling and songs and all sorts of things that go all the way through Scotland, down into England, through into Europe, So culture is shared, and there's an ebb and a flow to it, So I just thought we would share this with the whole world. And I thought this was a great idea, and it made it accessible to everybody. And that's a stroke of genius, I thought. Stroke of genius. And no bugger used it. It just didn't get used. And I thought, wow, I've got recordings here and songs here and stories and all sorts of things, recordings that other people had made up. Nobody used it. So I've had to do a wee bit of a sort of a readjustment, because I thought that when people were exposed to this sort of thing, to this richness of lore, they would just be immediately enchanted with it. And I think that's naive, because some people don't care. They really don't care. So my plans in the future are not to just throw it all out there, because it doesn't work. My plans with Sharps are to continue to offer opportunities to get together and reinstate intergenerational transmission, to get people of all ages into the one room, of all backgrounds, people that belong to the place, people that are in 2 minutes, and everybody in between, and just let folks share what they know. So we did that last year with a company called Riada, which was a brilliant thing. We did it in Kilmartin Museum. And that was a fantastic. That's the one of my favourite things I've done so far in the job. And we had people that were, 3, 4 year old. Rachel's Wains were in there with us, I seem to remember, and other Wains. And then there was 2 or 3 women that belonged to the area, born and bred in Mid Argyll. And then the next thing you know, they're sharing things about, archaeological sites, that have lore attached to them and stories attached to them. And I mean, I knew what they were talking about, but I didn't know where these places were or how to get to them. And so that was a fantastic thing, because then that made the community aware that these things existed. And there was that sense that everybody in the room was party to the information, and everybody in the room could therefore help to protect these traditions and be part of it, which I think is a brilliant thing, because you've got to bring people together and give everyone a chance to invest. So I'd like to do that, more of that type of thing. And I can't talk about what we're doing for Sheffield and Gaelic because we haven't heard back about the funding yet. But watch this space. But hopefully, we'll be doing something in Kintyre of a similar nature. But what I'd really like to do is to assist in the reinstatement of the intergenerational carrying stream. So to encourage people to get back together and just talk about what they know. And I would also very much like to pass these songs along to anybody who wants them. But honestly, I'm not really sure what the best way to do that is because I'm stuck down here in Glasgow all the time. So, so there's lots of things that I'd like to do, but more than anything else, if there was a way to gift the lore that I carry back to the area, because I don't really belong to Mid Argyll, and yet I've been lumbered with this because all the stuff was falling off the back of the car, and somebody had to pick it up, But I would like to get back to perhaps leaning a bit more into my Highland Caithness roots and my Irish roots, which I have been doing, of course, a lot of, but I've still got this weight of tradition that I would like to pass on because it's quite a lot for one person to carry. Got enough waffle for the now.
And also, we've got a few other ones coming in. I've got Lynn thanking you for expanding on your definition of tradition bearing and how one can take on that mindset. So thank you, Lynn, for that. And Joyce, you've got a question as well. Are you there, Joyce? Oh, you're there. You're right in front of me. Would you like to ask your question, Joyce? Oh, just need to turn your microphone on. Joyce, so I can hear you. If you put your microphone, oh, there you are.
Nice to see you, Joyce.
Hi.
How are you?
Nice to see you too. I was wondering if you have any plans in sharing your stories and history in America.
I have done several times. And I mean, never say never, in terms of coming back. But I know I've been over up and down the West Coast and up and down the East Coast, and of course out to Colorado and Texas a few years ago now. And so a repetition at some stage would probably be quite the pleasure, right enough,
Well, we'd love to have you.
Indeed.
In Colorado in particular.
I would love to be had. Great, thank you.
Could I possibly ask a quick question?
Yes.
Yeah, it's Joel Oak here. Would you consider using using rap as a way of popularizing Gaelic?
Rap.
And you know what I'm referring to.
I was just out on Saturday night there watching Kneecap at the Barrowlands.
That's exactly what I'm referring to.
Aye. Have I let my football loyalty slip there? Aye, yeah. Well, listen, there's somebody in the Scottish Gaelic world that does that a damn sight better than I would, and that's Gregor Lowry, and he's already doing that.
Mhm.
So I've been content to let Gregor get on with that. But funnily enough, because Gregor's fantastic at that. He's really something else at the rap, and his diction's absolutely perfect. You know, doesn't slur a single syllable. But funnily enough, there's a fella. Wait till I post the link into the chat here. I'll post the
Careful
song.
what links you're posting.
Aye, well, right enough. Aye, no, there's no sweary words or anything in this one.
Yeah.
First of all, I'm just going to pop the Dhail Riada Gaelic Facebook in. If anybody does the Facebook thing, they can click on that I mean, there's not much really happened since 2021 because almost all the elders that had any language have passed on now. I'm sure a few people in this virtual room know the same people I know who I don't want to name them on a call like this, but they know who I'm talking about. There are two or three people, two or three women that still carry a good bit of lore that I'm working with, but people who were conversational in the language and what have you, and were able to contribute in that sense, have passed on. So that project's not as active as it once was, but there's a whole 10 years worth of stuff to scroll back on and see what we were up to over the decade or so. But wait till I post this other link because I've been working with a fella from Australia who's got Scottish roots. Wait a minute. Will I find it? There we go. There we go. Oh, for goodness sake, what's going on? Restart Firefox. Geez, peace. What in the name of the wee man? Right, do you know what I'll do? I'll just type the song into right. So if you go to oh, for goodness sakes, my typing leaves a lot to be desired. You go to YouTube and you type in Machguai, which means echo. You'll find a project that I contributed to, and my section of it was all shot in location in Argyll. And I'm contributing. You'll see my funkiest dance moves as well, by the way, in my traditional kit.
I'm really
So
looking
just
forward to it.
batten down the hatches, sexy stuff,
Yeah.
Not. So check that out. And I'm working some more with this fella, White Dingo from Australia, because I actually came up with a few sort of hip hoppy type versions of old Gaelic songs a few years ago, practically a decade ago, and I never did anything with them. So I've sent them through to him, and he's really keen to develop them.
Mhm.
So classic Gaelic choruses with English rap in between, and I think it's got legs. So again, watch this space.
Well, I think that's everyone. So thank you very much, Àdhamh. That was really interesting. And it's lovely to hear about your family as well.